The legendary city of Troy stood as one of the wealthiest centers of its time before it was mercilessly destroyed at about 1200 BCE. As it was burned down to the ground, so were the answers to many questions on who the Trojans really were. Here we dive into theories on which language was spoken at Troy. When attempting to assess the linguistic identity of the Trojans, it is important to consider a vast timeline spanning more than 2000 years. The earliest archaeological finds indicate a late Neolithic settlement labeled Troy 0, dated to as early as 3600 BCE. Over millennia, layers of the city were built on top of each other until the site known as Troy 7a was burnt down between 1200 and 1180 BCE. Following the Bronze Age collapse, 3 more layers were eventually built, with the latter 2 being done by the Aeolian Greek settlers that had arrived during the Dark Ages. As for the Bronze Age itself, the period that we are concerned about the most, we are unfortunately left with no conclusive evidence on which exact language was spoken by the Trojans. It is also important to differentiate the time periods within the Bronze Age. There is no guarantee that the original settlers of the late Neolithic and early Bronze Age Troy were the same people as those inhabiting the area in the late Bronze period. The city proper was originally built at about 3000 BCE. Unfortunately, literacy would not be present in the Aegean for another 900 years, being first introduced by the Minoans of Crete. Even the Minoan language is still a mystery, being written on the still undeciphered systems of the Minoan hieroglyphs and Linear A tablets. What we can assume based on the archaeological finds is that the layers of at least Troy 0 to Troy 2 show cultural continuity spanning until at least 2300 BCE. Because literacy was not yet present in the Aegean at the time, we have no way of precisely assessing which language these early inhabitants spoke. It is relatively safe to assume that this language would have not been an Indo-European language, as there is no indication that any Indo-European group was present in the area so early on. Archaeological affinity with prehistoric sites on Lemnos and Lesbos, and possibly coastal towns in Thessaly, shed light on hypotheses that early Troy belonged or was connected to a prehistoric and pre-Indo-European Aegean group of peoples. Whether they could be connected to the legendary Pelasgians, Leleagues, or otherwise unattested prehistoric group remains difficult to determine. The subsequent period between 2300 and 1750 BCE is very little attested in archaeology. This was mainly caused by the archaeological malpractice of the 19th century excavators, which damaged the layers of Troy 3, 4, and 5 without properly documenting the findings. As a result, it is almost impossible to say whether the Trojan inhabitants of this period represented continuation of Troy 2 or were in fact a new group that came to occupy the area. This brings us to the layers of Troy 6 and 7, spanning from 1750 BCE all the way to the Bronze Age collapse. By this time, the city had acquired a unique northwestern Anatolian culture, eventually making contacts with both Mycenaean Greeks to the west and the Hittites to the east. It were these late Bronze Age Trojans that corresponded to the Trojan heroes of Greek mythology. This city was very well known and often fought over by both Mycenaeans and Hittites. The Hatti knew the city by the name of Velusa, which is extensively recorded in the Hittite sources. These sources also confirm that literacy was definitely present in Velusa, although there is no mention of the language that was spoken there. The Mycenaeans are believed to have called the city Wilios, an early Mycenaean Greek version of Ilios or Ilion, another name for Troy. Now, when it comes to the theories on the language spoken in Velusa or Ilios, there are quite a few. One possibility is that the Trojan language, which by this time would have been Indo-European, was either a dialect of or a language connected to one of the late Bronze Age forms of Greek. The only written form of Greek at the time was the Mycenaean Greek recorded on the Linear B tablets. Among possible indicators for this theory is the increased archaeological resemblance of late Bronze Age Troy to the Mycenaean palace centers. The palatial halls were built in a style of a typical Mycenaean megaron, with some houses resembling those in Argolis. After 1500 BCE, the Trojan pottery became a locally produced version of Mycenaean pottery of the time, indicating a clear mainland Greek influence, or possibly a related population. To further supplement this hypothesis, the Hittite records show 3 known kings of Velusa between mid-14th and late 13th centuries BCE. The first among these is called Kukuni in the Hittite texts. Although arguments have been made for Kukuni to be a Hittite version of Greek Kyknos, it is not possible to make any definite conclusions. However, a lot more can be said about Kukuni's successor. The next recorded Velusan ruler was a person called Alexandru by the Hittites. Alexandru or Alexandus almost certainly appears to be a Hittite rendering of a Greek name, Alexandros or Alexander. In Greek mythology, Alexander is another name of Paris, a prince of Troy that ultimately caused the outbreak of the Trojan War. Moreover, in a historical treaty between Alexander of Velusa and Hittite king Muwatalli II, the Hittites record a god of Velusa named Apollonius, serving as one of the deities overseeing the treaty. Apollonius makes striking resemblance to god Apollo, a protector of Troy in the Iliad and Greek mythology. The Iliad also records some of the Trojan Anatolian allies speaking a barbaric language and thus requiring their speech to be translated. The Trojans, on the contrary, are shown to have no problem communicating with the Greeks. However, this could have been a convenience in the work of literature and not necessarily a representation of objective reality. Either way, the Trojans of the time surely had many Mycenaean-like characteristics, apparently both in culture, religion, pottery, and possibly the ruling class, at least with one of their kings. Could this also be the case with the language spoken in Velusa? Different classifications in the case of this theory could put it anywhere from being a form of late Bronze Age Greek dialect to a language related to the Mycenaean Greek. Phrygians were neighbors to the Trojans, and their language was indeed related to ancient Greek, with whom they shared almost identical alphabet. This similarity was noted by the ancient Greeks themselves as well, which prompted scholars to propose a common ancestor, a Greco-Phrygian subgroup within the Indo-European family. Could the Trojan in this case also fit somewhere within this category, perhaps closer to Phrygian, perhaps to Greek, or perhaps somewhere in between? Another language which was variously said to be related to Phrygian is the poorly attested Mysian language. Mysia was situated right to the east of Troad, with its language variously said to be close to Phrygian or a mixture of Phrygian and Lydian. To the west, the closest region across the Hellespont was Thracia. Although the Thracian language is not well recorded either, it is hypothesized to have belonged to the Daco-Thracian subgroup. Geographic proximity to Troy has naturally prompted some scholars to speculate that Trojan could also be related to this linguistic family. The next theory has Trojan language as a form of Luwian, a Luwic branch of the Anatolian languages within the Indo-European collective. Luwian language was widespread across the Hittite Empire, so much so that it had overtaken Hittite itself as the speech of the majority of the population towards the Bronze Age's end. The evidence for the presence of Luwian at Troy appears to be in the form of a Luwian seal found at this site and dated to the layer of Troy 7b2 of 1100 BCE. This time period is obviously after the city's destruction at the end of the Bronze Age. However, the site continued to be somewhat inhabited, with a seal suggesting that at least some officials communicated in Luwian. Could this mean that Luwian was the language of the Trojans? It is not impossible, but one Luwian seal is not a definite proof either. Following the Hittite collapse, many of the successor states and former vassals continued to officially communicate amongst themselves in Luwian for the time being. Some scholars hold view that Luwian was spoken in western Anatolia among the lands of Mira, Seha, and Wilusa, having originally entered Asia Minor through the regions of Troad and Phrygia before spreading further towards the Hittite lands. However, others very much doubt this theory. While many western Anatolian states such as Lydia, Caria, and Lycia did speak Anatolian languages, those were all their own branches different to Luwian. Luwian-speaking base was the one located within the Hittite lands, and towards their south, not necessarily in Troy. Also, there are no Trojan personal names which can be conclusively classified as Luwian. Perhaps another possibility would be a language under the Luwic group, a linguistic family that includes Luwian itself, but also Lycian, Carian, Pisidian, and others. Finally, even more broadly, Trojan is also hypothesized to be a separate language of the Anatolian family, which includes Luwic, Lydian, Hittite, and Palaic. This brings us to the last but not least major theory, which classifies Trojans as a pre-Indo-European language. In this case, Troy would have been a continuation of the early phases of Troy 0, Troy 1, and Troy 2, dating to 3000 BCE and even earlier. This would mean that no Indo-Europeans, neither Luwians, Greeks, nor others, came to control the city during the Late Bronze Age. This theory often associates the Trojans with the proposed Tersanian family of languages, consisting of Lemnian, Etruscan, and Raetic. This is mirrored in the stories of the origins of the Etruscans in Greek mythology. There, the Etruscans originated from the Pelasgian migrants from the land of Lydia. The Pelasgians allegedly first moved to the island of Lemnos, and then migrated to central Italy, eventually founding the Etruscan city-states. Pelasgian migration to Italy was disputed even by the ancient writers, such as Dionysius of Halicarnassus. He viewed the Etruscans as indigenous to central Italy, and thus not related to the Pelasgians. However, the Greeks still universally recognized Pelasgians as legendary autochthonous inhabitants of the Aegean. On the other hand, they never equated them with the Trojans, not in culture and not in language. In fact, Greek mythology makes Trojans somewhat related to the Greeks themselves, with the mythical origins going back to Dardanos moving to Troad from Greece, and before him King Teucer sailing to northwestern Anatolia from Crete. Pelasgians were counted among the allies of Ilion in the Trojan War, but were presented as clearly different people to the Trojans. Still, Greek mythology could only go so far into the dim past. It does not offer any concrete proof or evidence on the linguistic identity of Troy, not in the late and certainly not in the early Bronze Age. What do you think? Do you believe that the Trojan language was related to Greek, Phrygian, or perhaps Thracian? Could it indeed be Luan as inscribed on the bronze seal? Was it its own language, or was it a continuation of a prehistoric, non-Indo-European language from the earliest times? Let us know what you think in the comment section. This was WanaxTV, and we'll see you again soon.